This podcast is brought to you by Osprey Approach. In conveyancing, fixed fees mean every minute counts. Too much admin eats into your profits, and inefficiencies slow transactions down. Osprey Approach is a legal software built for law firms, helping conveyancers stay in control by managing cases, accounts, documents, and compliance all in one place. From automated client updates to post-completion workflows, Osprey streamlines every step, cutting admin time and keeping transactions moving. Osprey Approach. We make running a law firm easier.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we're talking about post-completion. Yes, the bane of conveyancers' existence. We're talking at a point in time when the Land Registry have recently introduced validation rules to their submissions process that will hopefully reduce the number of requisitions it raises, which according to a blog on the HMLR website recently, could cost conveyancers as much as £19 million. I'm here with Priscilla Sinder, a director of property conveyancing consultancy, and fair to say, Priscilla, an expert in post-completion. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, David.
Hopefully that's a flavour of the discussion, but in the first instance, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Priscilla, and what you do.
My name is Priscilla Sinder. I am the Director of Property Conveyancing Consultancy. We are the outsourced post-completion company that deal with solely post-completion duties. We are UK-based and our team are solicitors or licensed conveyancers or heavily experienced. That's one arm of the business, and the second arm, which has just launched most of its services today, is the training hub, and that is to give the industry enhanced skills to just raise the bar in post-completion duties.
Your background personally, you're a property lawyer by trade as well, aren't you?
I am. I qualified in 2005. I was a solicitor in a private practice. I then moved into an in-house lenders department. I then moved into becoming a partner in a boutique law firm in London. And then my final move was a director in a large conveyancing firm. So my experience is not solely post-completion, it is the whole side of conveyancing really, but for the past 10 years I stopped practicing, and in 2015 my business PCC we launched, and through the success of that we've now created the hub that launched in 2024.
Why is it that you particularly felt post-completion was an area that you could end up focusing on, or you could focus the business on?
Sure. So in 2015, I became a consultant, and I saw that there was a massive gap in how post-completion was being conveyed. I did see that when I was in private practice, there never seemed to be a correct ratio of fee earners to post-completion team, and I understand why that is the case, but I did see massive gaps, and I saw a sense of relaxation in post-completion, that the diligence, the urgency to get things done was it was there, but maybe the discipline was a little bit relaxed.
Well, that's certainly the view, or seems to be the view, of the Land Registry, who have invested a huge amount of time in trying to get the conveyancing profession to up its game, I suppose, when it comes to post-completion. Conveyancers, of course, will push back and say, well, hang on a second, this is an organisation that is taking a year, 18 months, 2 years to do registrations. There is a bit of a tete-a-tete there, isn't there, between HMLR and conveyancers?
Absolutely, David. Back in the day when I was doing post-completion, there wasn't that delay. I mean, they were very efficient. I'm not saying they're not efficient now, but we've got to look at their circumstances, what's happened. The pandemic really has had a negative effect on every industry. And I think that really has a knock-on effect, because you're looking at new leases, transfer of parts that are completing in over like 18 months, which isn't acceptable. Landlords are trying to do the best, and they are doing recruitment plans. And of course, this data validation, which you said is coming into place in October 2025, that certainly will reduce the requisitions. I think we've just got to be a bit forgiving in the sense that the pandemic, for me, I think that's where I saw the massive delays being created.
Let's go back to the point that you made earlier about the fact that firms don't particularly place as much focus on post-completion as perhaps the other elements of the process. Why is that in your view?
In my view, I think there's two issues. One, it's not very regulated. For example, before pre-exchange, you have to do your money laundering, your source of funds. Post-completion doesn't have that, on the understanding it's already been done. The second point is it's not income generating. So as a business owner, you want to put all your investment into the side that's going to bring me more money. And of course, if it's highly regulated, I think since the introduction of the Legal Services Act in 2007, where the industry was open to ABSs, for example, alternative business structures, I saw law firms being more business orientated rather than just law firms. And with that sense of business comes investment in IT, but also investment in education. So investment comes in different forms, and it's not always expensive. So maybe there's not that focus so much on post-completion because it's not heavily regulated and it's not income generated. But I think what firms need to understand is that if you get post-completion wrong, it's really costly. So investment does need to be had in those teams.
Dare I say, as I said at the start of the discussion, there's an estimation from HMLR that requisitions could cost the industry an awful lot of money in that sunk time. We've got to account for that at the start of the transaction. No, surely we've got to charge more. I know this is a soapbox that lots of people will get on about charging more, but if there is an administrative process that has to happen, we have to find a way to either simplify and streamline that and or charge for it.
Sure, you do have to charge for it. However, why isn't there more education? And I'm not talking about the basic names, the misstates, and this is what the landlords are talking about, I believe. It's that data validation, getting names right, getting dates right. But what I'm talking about when I say the investment is, say a client's giving you a trust deed. They want a Form B to be registered on the register. The client receives the title information document and you only see that there's a Form A restriction. So why is that? Why hasn't the trust provisions in the restriction really been registered? Your fee earner needs to understand that. The reason why that happened is because the trust deed hasn't been drafted correctly for a Form B restriction to be registered. And these are the kind of things where I believe there's lack of knowledge. I'm not saying overall, but we can enhance those skills. And this is what's causing the time as well. So it's not just about the requisitions and the basic requisitions, but it's time that we need to agree, take into account in the front end. But if teams really understand post-completion, then it won't be so costly overall.
And there's a point in time when the sector is talking extensively about the fact that we can't recruit good conveyancers, that we're struggling to retain good conveyancers. This is a skill that is being lost. Is that what you're saying, Priscilla? Or is it a skill that we never had in the first place?
It's a skill we always had, but I think with new technology, clients are very different. In 2005, it was a different ball game, but everything is really pushing in a direction where it is a bit like, and I hate to say this, a bit like Amazon, that, well, I want to purchase and I want to complete very soon. they're forgetting that legal knowledge that you need. Indemnity policies do not cover all of it. Indemnity policies are there, but it's not to make our job easier. I don't think that's the correct understanding. Indemnity policies are there to protect us if you've really investigated, and there's no other way really. People who are hearing this, I might be triggering something, and I really don't want to do that. But that's my belief, and I think I've just been trained quite old school. There's always been that skill. There really has, but I think post-completion definitely has been diluted as an afterthought, as just an administrative job, and anybody can do it. Of course, anyone can do it, but you need knowledge to do it correctly.
I sense from what you're saying that this is an area that we should be specializing in. We're starting to see that in conveyancing, and you know, to be fair, the days of your lawyer who would do a family case in the morning, write a will at lunchtime, and then perhaps do a transaction in the afternoon, they're gone, and you know, to a certain extent, quite rightly so. But even within conveyancing, we're now starting to see specialist teams develop around new build, around leasehold, and increasingly so around leasehold because of
Yes.
all the challenges that are associated with it. There is a criticism that's leveled at some of the volume players in this sector that they hive off their post-completion to either an outsourcer or to a team. But is that the direction of travel here? This is an area that, as you say, if we get wrong, it costs us a lot of time and effort.
So the Law Society issued a publication saying that outsourcing is a way of servicing clients. It does enhance a client care service. However, when you outsource, you as the firm need to do your own due diligence on that company that you're outsourcing. Sometimes it does have a bad name because, oh, it's just outsourcing and we're giving it to people who are just going to rush it through. Do they have the knowledge? Are they going to take care in how we do it? But there are some companies who really take on that role as their post-completion team and work as if we are or they are part of the company. So look, outsourcing has its pros and cons. Of course, I'm going to take a very biased view, but it certainly helps medium to volume firms. But firms need to understand they must do their own due diligence on the firm themselves.
So just to lead back to the sort of the start of that question about whether it's a dedicated role within firms, is that linked more to the fact that we're not charging for it, therefore we can't afford somebody dedicated to it, perhaps?
The best way to answer that is to look at the model of the firm. I think if you're a high street firm, you might not want to have a dedicated role because you may have the capacity or you're not solely focused on conveyancing. I think it's a dedicated role when you have a medium firm or a volume player. I think it's a must because, look, I alluded to the fact it's not highly regulated, but it's really time sensitive. Your priority searches, when you need to serve notices and leases. So by having a really effective team, you do need to have that dedicated person. But I think throughout all the three models I've just mentioned, you do need to have dedicated knowledge.
You've been doing post-completion and training on it now for a long time. And yes, I mean, you're an outsourced provider, so there's an element of bias to this. But beyond that basic data that we still see that firms get wrong, what do you see as the real challenges and gaps in our knowledge around post-completion?
The real challenge is to actually understand the compliance behind it, the risk behind it. If you haven't submitted your application within a certain time, you're exposing your firm to perhaps litigation. You know, it's the compliance and risk that people really need to understand, as opposed to just saying, oh yes, post-completion, just administrative, let's get the names right, the dates, and it will be great. It's really post-completion is not about that. How can we get better? It is doing a gap analysis. Where is your post-completion department now? And where do you want to see it in the future? It's those two goalposts that you need to focus on. I mean, to fill those gaps, you need policies and procedures and checklists. But without knowing how to get to that point, it's very hard to fill those gaps. It's a bigger picture. In pre-exchange, I'm sure a lot of firms do file reviews just before the exchange happens. But is that same discipline happening in the post-completion side? What are we doing before we submit an application? And I think that really is a practical common element that could be missing in the profession.
I've got Donald Rumsfeld ringing in my ears. There are unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. Can you drill into that litigation point though, Priscilla? What are firms liable?
Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
Lending happens, you've missed the priority date, so your application hasn't been submitted. You try and obtain a fresh priority search, but you see someone else has taken your place. That's a subrogation claim. The lender is going to say, why am I now second place? Why haven't I got a first legal charge? And that's massive. That's a real issue. The market's saturated. Now, lenders are in a privileged position to say, well, look, firm A is costing so much here that they're not registering our charge in time, and it's a cost, it's a risk. Litigation is very quick to appear in post-completion, and this is what I alluded to earlier on. Fine, there may not be regulation, or you don't need to be a solicitor or licensed conveyancer to do it, but you need to understand the risks that post-completion pose. And it's those risks that sometimes expose the firm unnecessarily, and that's a concern.
Is there an element here where your professional indemnity insurer could start looking at your post-completion and potential claims that lie there as part of their review of your firm?
I'm speaking with some insurers already. I'm drawing this to them to say post-completion is so important. They're not looking at it like one would look at it at the pre-exchange. When you want to open up a law firm, I don't believe it's a question that's on the initial paperwork, but I really do think it should be. What is a new firm going to do to eliminate risk in post-completion? I think that'd be a great question. So I do think insurers need to start looking at post-completion, absolutely.
Let's move on to what training firms might need and how they get it. Clearly, your organisation has got some opportunities there. How do we start to identify that gap analysis that you mentioned, where we're looking at our expertise and understanding where those knowledge gaps are?
It's a very cheap way that firms can actually do it today, tomorrow, and you don't need to make massive changes. Look at the metrics, look at the data that you're getting at. For example, when is your post-completion team submitting their applications? How far is it away from the completion date? That's a risk there. If they're doing it on the 29th day, for example, of the priority search expiring, you're working inefficiently. Who is doing your post-completion work? You may have a tailored new build person doing post-completion, and there's so many differences in new build compared to a normal freehold transaction. Is your plan compliant? Is your plan in colour? Has it got a north point? And these are the points that we just really want to highlight in the hub. So understanding your knowledge is clearly doing a gap analysis that's very quick to do. Now, at the hub, we have today launched our compliance and risk package. Within that is your compliance targeted package, I would say, and that is offering gap analysis and how to do it, all your policies and procedures in post-completion, checklists, handover forms. We also have a bespoke service where we would go into firms and offer just analyze their post-completion department for them and help them do this gap analysis and create policies. The second service is mentoring. We want to empower staff. We really want to nurture that seed within them so that they become the person who fee earners cannot do without. Our subscription service is sent to subscribers every month, and the forum, I believe, it will really help the industry as a whole, because every month we are going to talk about post-completion. That could be a really easy requisition, or it could be something that the industry is being affected. For example, first port is suspended. How, as an industry, are we going to now deal with the restriction that they have in place? Do we submit an RX2? Do we try and get it removed? It's these kind of questions that, as an industry, we are going to raise the bar. So those are today's services we've just launched. In terms of the training, David, so that launched November 2024, and that is condensing all the 82 practice guides into 1-hour sessions, offering 30-minute Q&As, and those practice guides or those course notes are reduced into, course notes which are further reduced into key points. Those key points is where firms can use as a tool to avoid requisition. So we've taken the practice guides, we've reduced 82 of them into 1-hour training sessions. We are going to teach it online or in firms, and we are just going to go back to basics. So that's what we are offering.
And in terms of who you're recommending do these courses, given everything that we've spoken about today, presumably you're targeting them at people who specialise in post-completion, but also firms that have got people who perhaps need to refresh themselves.
Absolutely. So the target is post-completion staff, and any level can do it, from entry level to senior. However, we also do want to say that if you don't do a good job at pre-exchange, you cause issues for the post-completion team. So we are also targeting those fee earners to review or understand what inquiries they need to raise in order for their post-completion team to become really effective. So yes, it is post-completion staff team members. However, it is also looking at the fee earners, what questions they need to raise pre-exchange to make sure the client will receive the title information document in a timely way.
Dare I say that enquiries is not a topic that we are going to cover off today, Priscilla. That's a whole other rabbit hole that we won't go down. But it's been great to have you on the podcast talking about some of those things that firms need to be thinking about around post-completion as well. I think, the point that you make about there are the simple and there are the basic errors that I think people are well aware of, but then there are also deeper errors that obviously have more sizable consequences. So a useful reminder for firms. Thank you very much indeed for joining the podcast.
My pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Priscilla. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.